Hey, welcome to our next edition of Bible study. We're looking at the book of Revelation. When we left off last week, we ended at the end of chapter 12. Now, in chapter 12, we saw a woman who was about to give birth. We saw a giant red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and we saw the woman giving birth to a male child. And as we looked at this and studied this and looked at other biblical precedent, we said that there really wasn't much question that the male child symbolizes Jesus. The red dragon also not much. It's Satan. Okay, not much question about that. The real question is who's the woman? And, you know, it would be easy to say that the woman was Mary, but she doesn't fit all the criteria of what happens here in this in these verses. I could say that it was the church, but again, it's not, you know, the Messiah gave birth to the church, not the other way around. So if the woman's not Mary or the church, the answer is that the woman is actually Israel. And we see that, and we're not going to go through it all again, but important clue in both Revelation 12 and how the woman appears, going all the way back to Genesis 37, verse 9. And so chapter 12 ends by saying the dragon went off to make war against the rest of her offspring. And that would be those of us who obey God's commands and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Now, chapter 13 describes 2 of Satan's weapons in that war, the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth. So let's take a look at Revelation chapter 13, beginning in verses 1 through 10. And the dragon stood on the shore of the sea. And I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 10 heads, with 10 crowns on his horns, and on each of those heads a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. Now the whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Men worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can make war against him?" The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise his authority for 42 months. He opened his mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. He was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them, and he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names who have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. He who has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to go into captivity he will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword he will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of the saints. So, the dragon of chapter 12 is standing on the shore of the sea, and where he's standing is significant because the sea, once again in Hebrew thought and literature, including the Old Testament, often stood for chaos and evil. And out of this chaos and evil comes a beast. Now this beast has all the power and authority of Satan. And we know that he seems to have recovered from a fatal wound. And people worship both the dragon and the beast. And the beast spoke proud words and blasphemies. He has power for 42 months. He slanders God and those who follow him. He makes war against the saints. And all who are not followers of God worship the beast. Now, you've got to ask yourself, why would people worship a dragon? Why would people worship a beast that resembled a leopard with feet like a bear and a mouth like a lion, who has 7 heads and 10 horns, wearing 10 crowns on the horns, and each head with a blasphemous name. Why would people worship something like that? Well, because that's not what they physically look like. The original readers of Revelation, when they read about this beast, would have immediately thought of Daniel's description of 4 beasts in Daniel chapter 7. A leopard, a lion, a bear, and a creature that had 10 horns. Daniel 7, verses 1 through 8 says this: In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the 4 winds of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, Get up and eat your fill of flesh. After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. And while I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. So here in Revelation, those 4 creatures of Daniel chapter 7 are combined into one. Also, remember that the 4th beast in Daniel's vision had a little horn that spoke blasphemies against God, just like this beast has heads that display blasphemous names. What Jesus shows John is that these 4 beasts together in one beast make war against followers of God for 42 months. Now, in Daniel's vision, the 4 beasts are explicitly identified as kings and kingdoms, and so the beast in John's vision represents a political evil, a manifestation of the forces of evil that operate in and work through governments. Again, Daniel chapter 7, this time verses 15 through 27. That's where you can see that. I'm not going to read all of that now. But let me just say that in its immediate context, the Revelation is probably picturing the Roman government at that time. Revelation 17 speaks of a scarlet beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, and there the 7 heads are explained to be 7 hills, very likely the 7 hills on which Rome is built. And if this is the same beast, it could be that Rome itself is the beast, and the Roman emperors as the horns. Or it could be that the beast could refer to any number of the Roman Caesars, but if so, very likely it is Domitian, the emperor at the time of this revelation, who is being described. Domitian claimed to be a god, insisting that he be worshipped as Lord, God, Son of the gods, and Savior of the Roman Empire. And those who refused to worship Domitian in this way were sentenced to death. Now, by describing the beast out of the sea as having had a fatal wound, it would have brought to mind the popular legend that Emperor Nero, who had apparently committed suicide by cutting his own throat, was not really dead, but would return to conquer and rule over Rome once again. Over time, it was also said that he would come back from the dead. And for many believers, Domitian was Nero all over again, a terrible persecutor of the church. But it was not just for that time that the beast is in power. Verse 5 says the beast is given power and authority for 42 months, and some see 42 months as a literal 3.5 years. But because of its association as being the equivalent of time, times, and half a time, as in Daniel 7 and other places, I see 42 months as a number symbolic of the entire period of time from the giving of this revelation all the way to the second coming of Christ. And let me explain where I get that from. In the 10th through 12th chapters of Daniel, God describes a great and ongoing battle between the kings of the north, south, east, and west. And over time, things go back and forth between them until a particular king of the north takes power. And we're told that he takes the kingdom by intrigue, that he will act deceitfully, that he takes action against the Holy Covenant. Daniel 11:32 says, with flattery he will corrupt those who have violated the covenant, but the people who know their God will firmly resist him. Those who do not follow this king will fall by the sword or be burned or captured or plundered. There will be a time of distress as has never been seen before, but everyone whose name is written in the book of life will be delivered. Those in the grave will rise to either everlasting life or to everlasting shame and contempt. And what this is, it's an Old Testament vision of the end of the world as we know it. And when the question is asked, how long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled? The answer is given in Daniel 12:7. It will be for a time, times, and half a time. How long, the question is asked, to the end of these wonders? Not when will they start and end, but how long to the end? In other words, these things have already begun. How long till the end of the world? And a common interpretation says a time is a year. So a time plus a times plus half a time would be about 3.5 years. And here in Revelation we're told that the beast out of the sea would have authority for 42 months. 42 months being how many years? About 3.5 years. In the vision of Daniel, a time, times, and half a time refers to the length of time between receiving his vision and the final consummation of God's kingdom. In the same way, in the vision of John in Revelation, 42 months refers to the length of time between receiving his vision and the final consummation of God's kingdom. So I see the 42 months as being symbolic of the time between receiving a vision from God and its ultimate fulfillment. That Satan, the dragon, would continue his attack throughout history through the use of governments can be seen not just in Domitian, not just the Roman Empire, but in leaders like Hitler and Stalin and Mao and so many others. All throughout history, Satan continues to look for opportunities to use rulers and governments as instruments of his evil will. And these and so many others have been Nero all over again. And then one more thing in verse 3. By the beast having a fatal wound that had been healed, it shows itself as an imitator of Christ. Do you see how deceptive Satan is? I mean, who else in history caused people to worship the one who sent him? Who else in history has exercised great spiritual power? Who else in history had a fatal wound but refused to stay in the grave? Satan's parody of Christ is a major theme of chapters 12 and 13. And we're going to see more of this, but first, there's yet another beast, the beast out of the earth. So take a look at Revelation 13, verses 11 through 18. Then I saw another beast coming out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. He exercised all the authority of the first beast on his behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. And he performed great and miraculous signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of men. Because of the signs he was given power to do on behalf of the first beast, he deceived the inhabitants of the earth. He ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. He was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast so he could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. And he also forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. This calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number. His number is 666. Now, with the addition of this beast out of the earth, we've got the formation of an unholy trinity: the dragon, the beast out of the sea, and the beast out of the earth. Although this beast again symbolizes evil, at first glance it resembles Christ, having two horns like a lamb, performing great and miraculous signs. But although this beast resembles a lamb, it does not speak the words of a lamb, it speaks like a dragon. And later in Revelation, this beast is called the false prophet, and his primary purpose is to serve as a sort of prophet or priest to the first beast, who represents political power opposed to Jesus and his people. And the beast out of the earth does this by setting up the first beast, the political power, as a god, and forcing everyone to worship it on threat of death or economic ruin. So who does this beast out of the earth represent? Well, some would say, and it would make sense to say, that this beast is the priests of the Caesar cult, who provided over emperor worship at the temples. They set up images of the political power. They used ventriloquism to make idols seem to speak, and magic tricks to simulate lightning, and refusing to worship the emperor could result in your death. Now, another possibility is that this beast represents Christians who preached accommodation with Roman culture and emperor worship. These so-called followers of Christ were urging other believers to participate in emperor worship to avoid economic hardship, being a social outcast, and possible death. In doing so, they were acting as prophets and priests for the beast out of the sea, for political powers allied with Satan against Christ. But again, even though this had a contemporary meaning in John's day, it has continued to happen throughout all of history. There are countries today where you can be attacked and killed for being a Christian, and places where Christians are barred from educational opportunities and can only hold the most menial jobs. Our own government increasingly takes stands and passes laws that are in clear violation of Scripture. What we need to listen to is for words of the dragon cloaked in the voice of the Lamb. Now in verses 13 and 15, you got to ask yourself, don't you, from where does this beast get the power to call down fire from heaven, to make an idol come alive, and to have people killed? Well, it comes from Satan. You know, Satan has the power to do things. Now, the part about killing people, though, you remember, God puts that limitation on Satan. Satan can't physically kill God's people, but he can influence others to kill people. And so that's where all of that comes from. Then in verses 16 through 18, it talks about the mark of the beast. What is the mark of the beast? Now, given the apocalyptic nature of Revelation, there are those who believe that the mark is symbolic and not a literal visual mark. They would say that the forehead represents thoughts and the right hand represents actions. Therefore, the mark is collaborating with the beast. But even though there is a lot of symbolism in Revelation, there's nothing here to indicate that the mark of the beast is symbolic. First of all, the Greek word translated mark literally means a mark or a stamp or a brand. Verse 16 says people were forced to receive a mark. It'll be on their forehead or right hand. And verse 17 says that mark is either the number or the name of the beast. So this mark is forced, but at the same time it's voluntary. Let me tell you what I mean by that. If people cannot buy or sell unless they have the mark, that must indicate that there are people who did not have the mark. It's something that people take on themselves voluntarily in order to buy and sell, received on the right hand or the forehead. And the mark is one of two things. It is the name of the beast or the number of his name. And that number, which is man's number, is 666. So what is that mark? What is the mark of the beast? Could the mark be an implantable microchip, fingerprint or brainwave scans, credit cards, social security numbers? As I researched the internet for comments on the mark of the beast, I ran across some really interesting comments. One of the most prominent speculations was that the mark was to be an implantable microchip, and that this chip would identify who you are, be similar to, say, the photograph on your driver's license. Another speculation was that it would be a number like your social security number, similar to a credit card, and only you have that number. Some conjectured that it would be like a password or PIN number you'd need it to take out money or to authorize transactions. One site showed a picture of a barcode indicating that each barcode in existence has 666 embedded within it. I don't know. Maybe they do. One site says the mark of the beast is a new system of economic prosperity laid out by Saint Germain and his World Trust in 1729. Now, what does it mean that the number of the beast is man's number? That's the $666 question. A Bible college professor once taught, the less that Scripture has to say on any given topic, the more theories you'll find on the subject. And that appears to be what has happened with the number game behind 666. Now, back in John's day, there were no numbers, just letters that stood for numbers. For example, the letter Alpha was 1, Iota was 10, Omega was 800. Now, I posted a place to take notes. It's in the comments of the little video I made to remind people that we're going to be doing this live session. And so I've got these notes, and I've updated those notes to include this. It's the Greek alphabet. You see that? And the numbers that they represent. And so there's a lot of number play having to do with that number 666. They uncovered in the ruins of Pompeii, a bit of graffiti which read, "I love her whose number is 545. So I wonder, take a look at this. You can download it. It's on our website. You can find a link to it on our Facebook page. I want you to look at your number. Ronald is 100 plus 70 plus 50 plus 1 plus 30 plus 4. According to that system, my number is 255. Now, some have said that there will be 666 different ways to get the mark. Some have said the beast will have a total of 666 names. The mark of the beast is the name of the beast or any of his 666 names. In other words, you receive the mark of the beast by taking any one of the beast's 666 names. There are those who have said that the internet is the beast. Most internet addresses begin with www, World Wide Web. The Hebrew letter for W, the Vav, is also the Hebrew number for 6. Therefore, Vav, 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 www equals 666. Is that a possibility? Well, I want you to take a look again at verse 18. I've been saying that number is 666, but is the number of the beast 666? Or is it 666? Well, it's 666. But many interpreters speak of 666 as the number of the beast, and they say that since 6 is the number of man, 666 must represent a false trinity. Now, the number of the beast is not 3 sixes. It's a single number, 666. And unless we see that number in hundreds, tens, and ones, we'll never be able to understand this prophecy correctly. And here's the difference. If tomorrow you went to the bank to withdraw $666, you would not accept $6 plus $6 plus $6 instead. So who or what is 666? And you got to remember, some of these, when people figure this out, they're not looking at 666, they're looking at 666. So who or what? Well, it could be Nero. If you also use the title Caesar, change the spelling to Hebrew, and add a letter to his name. The names of emperors Caligula and Trajan came out to 666. Some of the popes of the Catholic Church have had names that worked out to 666. Martin Luther, John Calvin's names work out to 666 or 666. The word computer calculates to 666. Again, some people say there are 3 sixes in every barcode. Mark of the beast, 666. Bioimplant, 666. Digital ID chip, RFID scanner, RFID body tag, a satanic mark, e-identity, VeriShield, Mondex chip, Monsanto. All of those numerically come out to be 666. Now, when you calculate the number of Jesus' name, comes out to 888. And that's led to a lot of speculation, such as thinking of Sunday not just as the first day, but as the 8th day, making it the Lord's Day. The 8th day is the day of Jesus' resurrection, marking it as the beginning of a new age. And some have said that since 7 is a number of perfection, Jesus is better than perfection, and that 6, or 666, is less than perfection or failure. But it may also be that, like in so many other things in this vision, 666 is just an imitation of Christ. It may be that 666 isn't identifying any one person as the beast, but is instead identifying the character of the beast. Now, what we do know about this beast is that he will wield tremendous power and authority. Now, you might think that the next door neighbor who lets his dog do his business in your yard, you might think that neighbor is the beast, but he isn't 666. This person, or even government, will be a religious and political leader with the ability to perform great signs and wonders, and he's deceptive. He holds the power of life and death based on whether or not you worship the image of the first beast. He's also going to hold tremendous economic power, as no one will be able to buy and sell without having the mark of the beast on your right hand or forehead. And that mark will either be the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now, while we want to keep our eyes open and be aware of what's going on around us, the problem is not with the mark. The problem is why people will wear the mark. Look again at Revelation 13, verses 16 and 17. He also forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. People choose to wear the mark based on financial considerations. And Jesus talked about, you remember? Jesus talked about where and what our treasure really is. You know, if your treasure's in heaven, that's where you'll be. If your treasure's tied up in the security of this world, though, man, Satan's already got his mark on you. You really got to be careful in what your security, where your treasure lies. Now, we want to make a quick note that while this second beast is going to cause people to wear the name or number of the beast either on their forehead or their right hand, there are a couple of places where it talks about people having the mark of God or the seal of God on their forehead. Revelation chapter 7, verse 3 says, "Do not harm the land or the sea or the trees until we put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God." And then in verse 4, the number sealed was 144,000. Not a literal 144,000, but standing for the fullness of the number of Christians. And then in Revelation 9:4, they were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any plant or tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. And this is in the judgment of the fifth trumpet, where there were locusts like scorpions. So, mark of the beast, but the seal of God, they're two different things. Mention that the mark spoken of here in Revelation 13 is a literal mark or etching or brand, whereas the seal indicates more of something like how you would seal a letter, with wax and a signet ring. And so, while I see that the mark of the beast more as a physical thing, I do see the seal of God as something that is more internal than external. And the Greek word for mark, charagma, could also mean image or idol. Whereas the Greek word for seal, sphragizo, comes from the same word that we get, signet. An object used with wax to seal a letter. So who's telling us that 666 is going to happen? God is telling us this is going to happen. Who's telling us about beasts and dragons and the mark of the beast and the persecution of Christians? God is telling us this is going to happen. And what that means is it's going to happen. It's part of the plan. You can't stop it. You can't delay it. It'll happen. But you can beat it. Revelation 12:11. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their life so much as to shrink from death. And then just a reminder from Ephesians 6:12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Keep your eyes open, be alert, and be ready. The attacks come, they are coming. Maybe you're already faced with it. Satan, the one thing he hates more than God is you, if you're following Christ. And the thing that he would love to do more than anything else is to get you to cross that line from God's camp into his camp. And he doesn't care if you worship him. Satan doesn't care about that. He just cares that you don't worship God. So be careful. Be careful and watch for the signs of the times. And be alert. And as I said, be ready. God bless. And we'll see you next week for chapter 14.